get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Change, Lessons Learned from Engaging LGBTQ plus Older Adults for Advocacy. My name is Kim L. Hunt, and I use she, her pronouns. I am the Senior Director of Policy and Advocacy Operations at AIDS Foundation Chicago, where I also serve as the Executive Director of Pride Action Tank, which is a think tank on LGBTQ issues. And one of the areas that we focus on is aging, but we also focus on housing, financial security, youth, health, and safety. We've been around since 2015 and have done a lot of work with community, and a lot of that has focused on LGBTQ plus older adults. Before I go any further, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping while you look at Pride Action Tank's mission and our lovely graphics here. So there will be Q&A at the end of this, but feel free to add any questions or comments to the chat as they come to you. If you're like me, you lose them about as quickly as they come. So feel free to put those in the chat and we'll get to them. You are using the webinar version of Zoom, which means we can't see you and we can't hear you unless someone unmutes you. So we encourage you to show some love and support in the chat and with your reactions if you are able to use those. One thing about Zoom in this format is that you feel like you're kind of talking into a box. So anything you can do to show a little love to the panelists would be great. Just to give you an overview of what the next hour and a half will look like, I'll do a little more on the introduction front. You'll hear more about the specific program that this work that we're talking about today stems from. You're going to hear some stories from some of our older adults who have gone through a training with us. You're going to see some beautiful, beautiful pictures that were taken at a couple of photo shoots last year. And then we're also going to share some learnings from focus groups based on programs that we've done on the last couple of years. So I've told you a little bit about Pride Action Tank, and storytelling and empathy are really at the center of what we do, and we feel that those are critical to positive change. And I mentioned that we've worked with LGBTQ older adults, and we started that with our Out Aging Summit in 2017. And we had some specific goals for bringing folks together over a couple of days. And those were basically to create a platform that centered the voices and experiences of LGBTQ older adults, because we wanted to shed light on issues that they face and gaps in services and resources and opportunities. We also wanted to provide a diverse and inclusive forum for redefining aging and care. And then finally, we wanted to develop an agenda for advocacy, resources, and inclusion with and for LGBTQ older adults. And that summit was in 2017, but we put together our Out Aging Committee in 2016, initially to help us plan the summit. And after the summit, like with all of our summits, we have a report that is designed to be put into action. And so over the last, 6 years now, we have been doing just that. We have been putting the stories that we heard, the desires of LGBTQ older adults, as well as what we learned from policymakers, service providers, researchers, and others into action. And over time, our Out Aging Committee has grown significantly. This year, we added some more folks from downstate Illinois to truly make this a statewide effort. We've done trainings, we've done public policy work, and we've done research as well. As you might imagine, COVID-19 had a huge impact on what we were planning to do. Just before lockdown, we got a grant by RRF, Foundation for Aging, to essentially create a speakers bureau with older adults. And the plan was to go into long-term care facilities and speak with decision makers around the needs and frankly, the existence of LGBTQ older adults in their facilities. But like everybody else, we had to pivot and do something else because of the pandemic. And you're going to hear more about that. So that was just a little teaser to set you up. What we're actually going to do now, though, is we're going to shift. I'm going to stop talking. In fact, I'm going to turn my camera off. And I am going to, and you are going to hear from our first storyteller, who is Phyllis Johnson. And Phyllis is and let me just say, I know Ayana is going to talk about this later, but these pictures bring me so much joy. These pictures were taken by Brissa Del Mar of Breeze Creatives for a photo shoot that we did, one Center on Addison and one at Affinity Community Services last year. So you will see these throughout. And this is just a lovely, lovely photo of Phyllis. So Phyllis uses the pronouns she, her, hers. She considers herself a rookie storyteller. We don't consider it that, but this is what's in her bio. She is owned by her one four-legged son who is happy she is retired and claims her total focus. Phyllis, you can now share your story.
Thank you. Luckily, my son is napping, so I'll probably get through this without having to run out and take him for a walk. I've always been a little clueless. For example, most people figure out their sexuality when they're in their 20s or even teens. Not me. Once a colleague excitedly showed me an article about a new gay line of greeting cards. At the time, I couldn't figure out why she was showing me this article. As time went on, I realized the majority of my friends were lesbians. After 2 coming out groups, I finally came to my senses and came out in my early 40s. I was lucky to have such accepting colleagues. My longtime partner and I had a great retirement plan. We were going to sell our respective houses and move to a more temperate climate. Then a friend suggested we might try living together. As luck would have it, I had just signed the contract for a single-family house on the south side where she lived. So we decided we'd try living together, kind of as a test. We passed, flying colors. She moved in a month after I took possession. We were very, very happy. We lived in one of the most socially conservative Black communities in Chicago. One of those nice neighbors persistently tried to figure out our relationship. Were we cousins? Were we sisters? You know the drill. In my early 60s, I became a peer group leader for Affinity's new 60-plus group, the Trailblazers. We had a luncheon that featured a speaker talking about supplemental insurance plans for Medicare, how all that worked. It was our second luncheon like this, and we promoted the luncheon in lesbian and senior spaces around the South Central community of Chicago. We got a great turnout, much better than the 4 people at the first one. Our great turnout included some strangers. Unfortunately, it was scheduled on my personal holiday, my birthday. It was bad enough that I shared my birthday, my personal holiday, with my twin. But now I had to share it with this luncheon. I thought hard and long about what I wanted to do to celebrate in spite of having to do the luncheon. I decided to propose to my partner. Thanks to our great timing, the Marriage Equality Act had just passed. And I thought, well, time is right. So I got a new outfit and a ring and the assignment to close out the meeting. As I was talking about the gifts my association with Affinity had brought me and me and older lesbians, I realized that two strangers were just not happy to be in a lesbian gay event. I plunged forward. I began walking toward my intended. One of the strangers, a lady in a pink hat, was vigorously shaking her head. I got down on one knee and proposed. 10 months later, we were married. Unfortunately, my spouse was sick at the time of the ceremony. She died 4 months later. At the memorial, I was surprised to see two groups of neighbors come. We were good neighbors. We've come a long way. At the Out Aging Summit that Kim just mentioned, I met the director of a senior center in Chicago. She told me a story about a gay participant. He had left a letter on her desk saying, "I'm out, but thanks." And it was strange to her because she loved him. They had a great relationship. He had a great relationship with the staff, but just didn't feel accepted by the other participants. Nowadays, many LGBT cultural competency trainings, there are many LGBT competency trainings at the staff level, and they deal with old folks, among others. I always wonder what my reception would be among other old Black folks, like the lady in the pink hat, who did not know me as a good neighbor, a good colleague, a good friend. Would I gain acceptance or be shut out? I think we need to require cultural competency training for participants in congregant senior settings. It's, I just finally think that it's time, and there's so many ways that we're different. So this is, for me, a no-brainer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Phyllis. Let's go ahead and give Phyllis a round of applause. Click those emojis in the Zoom chat. Thank you so much, Phyllis, for sharing your story. It really shines so much on a piece that we focused on in the focus groups and in the report as well, which is just the first out generation, which we'll get into in a little bit more. And I'm starting to see some people go into the chat. So yes, all the flowers to you, Phyllis. Thank you. We're going to go ahead and shift over now to talk a little bit more about the program, the Storytelling for Change workshop that Phyllis had participated in. We're so excited to kind of share a little bit more about what we do. The workshops are under the Outreach Initiative, and as Kim had mentioned before, it really was born out of the Out Aging Summit and the committee that carried through past the summit as well. And so under Outreach, we have all of these workshops with For Change in it, so you can see why we titled this presentation For Change. But we have storytelling and then advocating for change, which we'll dive a little bit deeper into in the next slides. We also have building networks for change, which is primarily for LGBTQ plus older adult allies and folks who work within aging spaces. And all of these sessions in the past have been through virtual sessions over Zoom. That was the main modality for us. And a lot of the reason why, of course, is because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We all lived through it, right? And so we understand the shift that had to happen. But we've carried through with these virtual sessions, even kind of being quote unquote out of the pandemic. And the reason being is because it really adds, it really allows for accessibility, it gives people a chance to engage with these workshops in a way that they wouldn't have been able to before if we'd done in person. And also for folks and participants who enter these workshops, they also receive a stipend. Just depends on which workshop you take. Sometimes you get a weekly stipend if you continue on week to week. Sometimes it's a full culminating stipend at the end. That's our little incentive to get folks to stay on. But to go into a little bit more on Storytelling for Change itself, we have two facilitators for that workshop. That's Nick Weststraight, which you will hear from later on in this presentation. And then also Archie Jamjoon, who is a professional storyteller. And in this past year, 2022, we also had Phyllis, who is our peer facilitator. And so we added this peer facilitator based on feedback that we were getting from post-event surveys, and to really add in a component of support, a peer-to-peer support for new storytellers and folks entering the workshop for the first time. The workshop itself is 6 weeks long. And so Nick and Archie take these participants week by week to craft their stories, to practice in front of each other. And then it culminates into a storytelling showcase where we invite our partners, past alumni, and other community members to watch these folks tell their stories like we just did with Phyllis. The goals for Storytelling for Change are to empower LGBTQ+ older adults to share their stories on multiple platforms, strengthen skills around crafting and telling a story to discuss issues that older LGBTQ+ adults face as members of the first out generation. And to talk a little bit more about the first out generation as well, I think this is so important because it's really a recognition that coming out today looks so different than it did than with our LGBTQ+ elders. So really shining a light on what those experiences look like. Third, we have form intentional relationships and in community around LGBTQ+ older adult experiences. We'll hear more later on around how these workshops were really important and vital for folks during the pandemic as a form of community building. And then lastly, to build a living library of stories. I really loved this word too, living library. So if you're interested in hearing and seeing more of our storytellers, you can visit our website, prideactiontank.org, and you can view that living library there. Next, we have Advocating for Change. So this one looks a little bit different. The goals here, well, it's a 4-week workshop, and the goals are to familiarize ourselves with LGBTQ+ terminology and history, learn about national and state trends in LGBTQ+ older adult experiences and outcomes, improve knowledge about the rights of LGBTQ+ older adults, and create personal and collective stories for use in advocacy work. So as you all can see, there are a lot of overlap, right, with the Storytelling for Change and Advocating for Change workshops. Advocacy and storytelling are so closely tied, and we, both of those components exist with both of those workshops. They just look a little bit different in terms of the structure. And then unlike Storytelling for Change, it's 4 weeks and we invite new speakers each week, so it's not the same. And some topics include, in the past have been language and community building, aging services and resources, knowing and protecting your rights, and then Advocacy 101. And so this workshop really is to kind of gear folks into kind of a journey more towards advocacy in terms of policy, legislation, things like this. And it really, again, it culminates into a few other events that we hold over the year. But again, I'll detail that in the next slide. Before we do that, I wanted to share a little bit of the post-workshop survey data that we had from last year in 2022, response rates here on the left. And overall, folks were very happy with the trainings, which I'm really glad to see. We had 86.75% say that they were somewhat or very satisfied with the workshops. 91.5% stated that the trainings had either met, exceeded, or far exceeded their expectations. And then we had 26 out of the 29 respondents out of all 4 weeks report that they were somewhat or most likely to recommend one of the trainings to a friend. So we're really happy with these trainings and we're so excited to continue on with them, and especially with the fact that people are happy with how they are. But of course, there's always room for improvement for us, and we always ask that. So there are a few pieces that we wanted to highlight that we learned from last year. One being a better framing of agenda and objectives for each training. I think we heard a few stories throughout that folks would kind of hear about the workshop and just enter and participate without really knowing what was going on. which I think was really great. I think it's really a testament to the kind of programs that we do. But there was, opportunities for us to be a little clearer around expectations, what folks are going to get into week by week, and really starting that at the beginning. So in a sense, kind of like an orientation. We also heard that folks really wanted more time to engage with one another and the main facilitators. And I think this is really a part of the, the fact that we're on Zoom. So engaging is a little bit harder, but we definitely heard this, and we're taking this into future workshops to ensure that they're a little bit more interactive. And then we had some more very similar to the first one, but more time to ask questions, less reading of presentations, guidance around group discussions. This next one, which is better facilitation of discussion so that no one person holds the mic for too long. And to really allow the expertise of our participants to be shared. So we're really hearing that folks want to learn from one another. They want to share their experiences, what they know, especially according to the topics that we discuss. And so that's really important for us, and something that we definitely recommend for other folks who engage LGBTQ plus older adults, especially within like a training format. And then this last one, ensuring that jargon and acronyms are explained so that participants who are new to the field are not left out as well. So really taking our time with the topics as well. And then last piece on this post-workshop survey data, I did want to mention, this is all of this feedback here is specifically for the Advocacy for Change workshops from last year. We did not do post-event surveys for the Storytelling for Change, and that was simply because of the kind of small cohort that it was. And it's the same cohort each week. Whereas the Advocating for Change, you get to kind of pick and choose which sessions you get to attend. Right, and then beyond the workshops, right? So things don't end for our alumni once they finish the workshops. As you can see, we had Phyllis this morning, and soon I will be introducing another storyteller. But folks go on to tell their stories, to advocate in multiple events, one being our legislative breakfasts. We typically have 2 each year, one sometime in like late summer, that usually focuses on people living with HIV and AIDS. And then the second one happens in December typically, and that one focuses on LGBTQ plus older adults and issues within the state. And in both of the legislative breakfasts, we get a number of speakers who are administrators, folks who work in the field. We also get elected officials and representatives to come be a part of that conversation. Second we have here is the How I See Myself, How I Want to Be Seen event. This is the event that Kim was mentioning early on with the photo shoot and the photos that you see in this presentation. We had taken a total of about over 700 photos. So we are really just getting the tip of the iceberg here. But that culminated into this event. And it was a 2-week event. One that happened at Affinity Community Services on the south side and Center on Halstead on the north side near Boys Town. And again, we had storytellers for that to open us up for that programming. And it was really a great moment to build community and to showcase our LGBTQ plus older adults, especially in terms of stock photos. Before this, we had many conversations around, LGBTQ plus older adults and older adults in general in terms of stock photos is just very sparse online. So we definitely wanted to add to that. And then lastly, we have Advocacy Day, which if a lot of you who are familiar with AFC, you know that we do this every year. We go to Springfield, we bring our advocates with us, and we advocate and lobby for our policy priorities and key issues that are important to us. And so this is just another forum where our advocates get to join us and can use the skills that they learned and built upon in the workshops before. So much more. Again, this is a tip of the iceberg. There's so many more other events that we engage our alumni with, and we have just started doing more alumni centered events as well to continue that networking and community building. But now I'd like to introduce our next storyteller. Again, I think it's really cool that we get to kind of sandwich, you know, a storyteller and then what the workshops are about, and then to kind of see it again come to life. And so I'd like to welcome to our stage, our virtual stage, Lamar Jackson. Before I do that, Lamar is a retired social worker with a passion for theater and the arts. He's also a producer and director of several small theater groups working with the LGBTQ+ and 12-step communities. He's an avid astrologer and dream interpreter, and he also has interests also in event and party planning. So a little plug for Lamar. Lamar, you can go ahead and share your story.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. A little frazzled this morning because my computer decided to kick me off the site, so I had to scramble and get my tablet, but I'm glad to be here. When I think about my journey through the wilderness of unmanageability into the rooms of recovery, I realized I'm at war with the terrorists, the ultimate enemy, addiction. Every time I go to an in-person meeting, do service work, help another recovering individual, or even log on to a Zoom meeting, for me, it's like a carefully scrutinized tactical maneuver, which infiltrates the very core of my being to defeat the terrorists. But wasn't always like that. Flashback to the 90s. I'm in the throes of active addiction and embroiled in office drama. There was a coffee station in the back of the office, and there was a small box filled with change, quarters, nickels, dimes. The idea was grab a cup of coffee, throw in 50 cents. It was the honor system. Now, I never actually took any money out of that box, but I never really put the right amount in the box. The box was always full. I threw in a nickel, a dime, which meant that whenever they did the tally, the money was always short, and they just couldn't figure out who was the coffee bandit. One Saturday afternoon, I arrived at work rather early as I'd been up most of the previous night, getting high and smoking crack, and I desperately needed a cup of coffee. Much to my surprise, there was no money in the box. But I figured I'm early. Eventually, people would be putting money in the box, and it would camouflage the 3 pennies and nickel I had just dropped in. I grabbed my cup of Joe, headed to the break room to get my bearings and to relax before the start of my shift. Not long after I sat down, a middle-aged female supervisor tore into the break room like a tornado on the path of destruction and stood next to my table. She asked, "Did you get a cup of coffee?" At this point, I'm keenly aware that something has gone awry. Shocked, momentarily speechless, she asked again. I answer in the affirmative, and she bellows in a loud roar. "We're having a party today, Lamar. The coffee is free. Here's your 8 cents. And she slams the coins on the table in front of me. And such few people as there were in the break room tried not to stare at me out of respect. But they realized, as did I, that they had found the coffee bandit. Yes, I was humiliated, I was mortified, but it didn't stop me. I continued to get high, and in the days, weeks, months to follow, it got worse. So much so that eventually the administrator calls me into the office and says, "We can't depend on you. You're not a team player. Consider yourself suspended pending dismissal." I was terrified at the thought of losing my job. So I confessed, because I had heard that if you told your employer you had a drug problem, you couldn't be fired by law. The employer, my administrator, calmly advised that they'd send me to treatment, to rehab, but there was no guarantee I'd ever get my job back. They'd schedule a hearing after my stay in rehab. I couldn't lose my job. I needed my job to get high, and besides, I owed hundreds of dollars to my dealer for all the stuff I'd got on credit. Right then it occurred to me that being reserved and low-key and introverted was not going to win friends and influence people. I had to step out of my comfort zone. I had to become the type of person who was willing to do whatever it took to get my job back. I went to treatment. And right away, I knew the assignment, my assignment. I needed to get my job back. I was always the first to volunteer. I took risks. I asked questions to show interest. I was always the first to speak up and to put a positive spin on whatever material was presented. Yes, I razzle-dazzled them and I took them by storm. And in 3 days, they voted me vice mayor of the community. 3 days after that, the current mayor was discharged. They voted me mayor of the community. The office I held for the next 18 days, I was in treatment. Now, at this point, I had a very low opinion of rehab treatment. It was a farce. I gave a performance and they fell hook, line, and sinker. And I thought, how ridiculous, how absurd is this? But I remember, I'm on a mission. I continue to trudge the road of uncertainty. The counselor suggested that when I leave treatment, I should go to a recovery home in order to build a strong, solid foundation. It would probably also look good on my recovery resume. And who knows? Might even help me get my job back. That's all I heard, get my job back. I went to a recovery house. Strangely enough, I stayed sober. I began to utilize the information I had learned in treatment. I started working steps, and about a month later, they had the hearing with the administrator, the union steward, and they sent me home. They said, wait for a phone call. 5 days later, I received that phone call, and I got my job back. My dealer came to my job every payday as I paid him off in installments and never looked back. Suddenly for me, helping others and being of service was more important than getting high. Things were great until they weren't, because of all the machoism, toxic masculinity, and homophobia. But I never gave up. And a year later, they appointed me house manager of that house. And I immediately became an advocate for the LGBT plus community. I started the very first support group for my community. We also started the first 12-step meeting at a traditionally straight Alano club. I started going to meetings all over the city. I went to a meeting every day for the first 3 years. And we went to meetings as a group. I started to sponsor our community. And some years later, I went back to school and became an alcohol and drug counselor. Today, I claim victory over the terrorists. But the war is never over. We have a daily reprieve. But the good news is that we do recover one day at a time. Thank you for listening. I'll keep coming back.
Wow, thank you so much, Lamar. Thank you, everybody. Please shower in the love into the chat and the emojis. Thank you, Lamar, so much for sharing your story, sharing your vulnerability with us and your journey. that's my second time hearing Lamar speak and share this story, and it hits every time as well. So thank you. All right, so we're going to go ahead and shift into what I like to say the meat of our discussion, really what brought you all here, which is the report that we are releasing today, and that you'll have access to by the end of the presentation. And as we had talked about before, we did this through focus groups. And so in the Outaging Committee, we had talked through and tried, and we were just kind of discussing, right, how we wanted to get feedback, how we wanted to learn from previous participants, and really understand what it is that our workshops were doing, how it was impacting our community. And so in 2022, in early spring, we formed the research subcommittee to begin planning. And we had put together a number of things, one being a research framework, which was to guide the process from the focus group space to the analysis phase, and really just throughout the whole research process. We also had created a focus group guidebook that includes a facilitator script and set of questions. We'd also done just curating a list of potential candidates according to the training series they attended. So the focus groups were according to which workshop you had attended. And then lastly, we had developed an outreach template as well to begin scheduling those focus group sessions. And so if you are interested in any of these components, any of these documents, those are found in the appendix section of the report when you are finally able to view it. But a little bit more on the focus groups. Again, it was a very collaborative planning process. You know, it involved a lot of folks from the Outaging Committee and a lot of coordinating between us and our advocates and our storytellers from the past. The sessions were 2 hours long. We had 4 in total, one for folks from the Advocating for Change workshop, one for the Storytelling for Change. Then we had another one that was combined. We had a few folks who did both, so we kind of recognized that their experiences were a little bit different because they had done both. And then we did a 4th focus group for the facilitators of both sessions as well to get their reflections. And each focus group averaged about 3 to 4 participants. And we did that intentionally because, again, even though they're 2-hour sessions, we understand that folks have a lot to say and they want to discuss and engage. And so we wanted to have that time in a small group to ensure that everyone was kind of getting the time that they needed to talk through not only their own personal experiences, but their experiences with the workshops as well. And then to go into the research values framework itself, again, this is found in the report, but I'm going to go ahead and share half of it here. I won't go through line by line, but I will describe that, you know, the framework was so important for us. It was one of the first things that we did. It was really integral to how we approached the work, how we moved from one component to the next. And it really gave us a broad view of who we wanted to engage, how we would engage them, how we would partner and engage with one another in our community. And it really put it in, you know, in the forefront for us, what our priorities were for this research project. And then as well, it also added a level of accountability for us. So again, it was just, values framework, really, really important for how we moved through the project. And then here we have a few more of what this is. I believe there were a total of about 15 values, and each value goes into it a little bit more. So again, you can view that in the report, but some pieces here that I'd like to highlight are, ensuring that the research is representative of all members of the LGBTQ+ communities, and as well as those who had participated in our workshops. Really getting into the sustainability of the research and building structures to ensure that, and then committing ourselves to ongoing learning and skill development. So as we're doing this as well, we're continuing to stay within this kind of learner mindset to ensure that we're not really missing anything. All right. And with that, to kind of go into a little bit more about what this analysis phase looked like and the themes of the report, I'd like to pass the mic on to Nick Westrate. Nick?
Thank you, Ayana. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm coming through? Good. All right, thanks so much, Ayana. Hi, everyone. As Ayana said, I'm Nick Westrate. I'm a professor at the University of Illinois, Chicago. I work in the Department of Educational Psychology here, but by training, I'm a lifespan developmental psychologist. So that's why I am here talking to you about research. Research is something I do and something that I'm able to bring to Pride Action Tank. And it's been a really fun, rewarding, fulfilling, interesting journey to start doing, academic community practice partnership. This isn't something that I do in my research program typically. So to be able to connect my community passions and the passion around advocacy to my research knowledge and resources here at the university, such as an institutional review board, has been really wonderful. So happy to talk more about that later. But really, my job today is to introduce you to the results of the focus groups that we had conducted that Ayana just introduced. So I'm going to start by describing the method that we used. So we had these 3 very rich, very deep focus groups in 2 hours with 3 to 4 people. You get a lot of information, which is wonderful. We then had the task of making sense of that information. So what we used was a method called reflexive thematic analysis. And I highly recommend, if you're interested in doing this type of work, using this method. It provides a framework or a structure for making sense of qualitative data, open-ended data, text data, and it guides you through identifying patterns in the data, patterns of meaning. And there are 6 steps to the data analysis process. It starts with familiarization, so that's really getting deep into the data, in touch with the data, reading it over and over again. The next step when we start trying to reduce the data into meaningful units is called coding. Then our codes, which we may have several. In our case, with 3 focus groups, we had like 30 or 40 codes. You can think of these as like preliminary themes or early emerging themes, but then we need to look at how those codes relate to one another and start reducing them yet again into broader themes that sort of, or you can think of them as clusters of codes. We then look at those themes, we refine them, and eventually settle on a certain number of themes. In our case, it was 7. So this process was something that myself, Ayana, and Jackie Thaney, who's also on the call, engaged in. Ayana and Jackie are both staff at Pride Action Tank, the AIDS Foundation of Chicago, and I guess I was wearing the researcher hat, but we were all researchers, and we spent time at the beginning, really learning the method of thematic analysis together. And then we did all of this together in a series of maybe a dozen meetings, and those meetings often took a full afternoon. And the process took months because we were challenged with doing this work on top of our, many other, responsibilities in our respective jobs. So that's something that needed to sort of be worked through. In any case, I've already said too much about reflexive thematic analysis. That's because I'm a geek and I love research. But I want to drop into the chat that link that's going to take you to a website, which will tell you more about reflexive thematic analysis. The website is generated by the 2 researchers who created this method. I also have this textbook here. This book is very accessible. I will say that the people who designed thematic analysis, they really take a teacher mindset, I think, in that work. So it's very accessible. In any case, it's in the chat here for you to learn more, and something I'm happy to talk with you about further. So what I'm going to do now is introduce you to our themes. As I said, there were 7 of them. So Ayana, if you could present those. Yeah, I'm going to just read the themes now, and then we'll talk about each of them in depth. The themes were the joys of being in community with other LGBTQ+ elders, being seen and heard as LGBTQ+ elders at all intersections, gaining a new or renewed sense of purpose in and through advocacy, learning to tell a different kind of story, learning about oneself through learning to help others, the cost of the story, creating space for vulnerability, and cultivating a community of support. So some of these you can think of as impact or outcome themes. What did the participation in the workshops provide the participants with. Others are more process themes. How do we go about doing this work? What did we learn through the focus groups about how to create a generative space for training or learning about advocacy? Okay, so what I'm going to do is talk you through each of these themes, share a narrative excerpt from the focus groups, but all of this information is available in our report, so you can look at it in further depth. Thank you, Anna. So we labeled the first theme, the joys of being in community with other LGBTQ+ elders. Now, it's well documented that social isolation and loneliness can be a serious concern for older LGBTQ+ adults. Our participants expressed that these challenges were especially salient for them during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we discovered through the focus groups that the workshops were an important antidote to that sense of social isolation. So take, for instance, the following quote. The workshops were an anchor. It was having that sense of community. I didn't think about it as, oh, geez, I'm going to go hang out at the club. But the idea that when we met every other week or whatever it was an anchor. It was a way that I knew I could check in with other folks, that just on the basis of me being a member of the LGBT community, they were curious about my welfare and well-being. So because at that time, I was in a place where I was not getting that kind of treatment, it was an anchor for me. It was nice to have that little sense of community. This same elder also referred to the workshops as a lifeline during the pandemic, which was a really profound statement about survival during a really difficult time. Beyond this, our participants told us that being members of the first out generation meant that not only were LGBTQ+ older adults invisible to society until relatively recently, but that LGBTQ+ older adults were invisible to each other. For some, the workshops were one of the first opportunities to be in community with other LGBTQ+ elders. And as one elder put it, they felt that they were making up for lost time together and relished the opportunity to share space and learn from each other. It was for them truly joyful. And as a facilitator of the storytelling workshops, it was also truly joyful for me. An incredibly, incredibly intimate process. The next, for our second theme, we called this one, and this is an important one, being seen and heard as LGBTQ+ elders at all intersections. So we heard from our participants that older LGBTQ+ adults often feel invisible to society, to each other, and to service providers. Storytelling and advocacy provided platforms for members of the LGBTQ+ older adult community to feel visible on several levels, including both personal and public. As one participant put it, I think that LGBT older adult stories are majorly erased. It's like you hit 55 and you disappear. It's not that you hit 55 and become straight or binary or any of those things. You just sort of poof, disappear. And of course, that's not the case. And so I think that's why it's so important to focus on it. In response to this statement, another participant said, I don't know that we're erased. I think we're just ignored, which is even worse. That's even worse. Either way, the need for visibility, validation, and affirmation was a strong theme among our participants, and one that they felt the workshops would help remedy. The workshops and, of course, what came out of the workshops. In addition to being seen, they also expressed the importance of having other people seeing themselves in their stories and helping them to feel not alone. Several of our participants named the specific need for intersectional visibility. That is, advocacy work that renders visible the intersections between LGBTQ+ identities and other identities and experiences related to, say, disability, race, ethnicity, or geographic context. One of our Black elder participants explained that service providers are not equipped to provide culturally responsive care. They said, I cannot walk into an organization with my skin color and who I am and how I've lived my life as easily as many others can and access those resources, because nobody is really going to say to me, whether I'm at a gay organization or a straight organization, right? I know that your experience might be a little different. I know that you might be hesitant to even let me know who you are or what you're dealing with. And most importantly, I don't even understand you. I've had many caretakers, and I ask them directly, were you trained on working with people in my community? The answer is no. These excerpts remind us that the LGBTQ plus communities are not monolithic, and the advocacy work must adopt an intersectional lens to ensure people are seen in the fullness of their identities. I want to share one more quote that speaks to the importance of visibility, and it's just so powerful, I need to share it. Short. The more our stories come out, the fewer wheels people have to reinvent. It gives us legacy, heritage, a place on the great mandala of time. I get goosebumps just thinking about the importance of being seen. Moving on to our next theme, our third theme, we named that gaining a renewed sense, or new in some cases, sense of purpose in and through advocacy. So our participants shared their experiences transitioning into older adulthood and described the uncertainties of aging. For example, the transition to retirement left some participants directionless and in the space of searching for new meaning and purpose in life. The workshops helped them to reflect on their life's purpose and sparked a feeling for some of a new lease on life or a second coming of age. Relatedly, participants shared how their engagement with the programs led to new opportunities for meaningful engagement that they would have maybe not had access to or thought to pursue before. One participant said, "It opened up a bigger world for me." Another said, "It's like, well, no, you need to do these workshops. This is what's supposed to happen." Because once I was retired, I said, and I prayed, boy, did I pray. It's like, God, what is it you want me to do? And now all of these doors are opening and there are advocacy opportunities. And I'm learning so much about myself and I'm learning so much from other people. And that's what I think is important about it. Another participant described that the workshops reignited his capacity for activism that he thought was in his past. As he articulated in our focus group, attending the workshops quite literally mobilized him into action to confront a negligent housing management company for the 9-story building he lived in. This person said, "I'm grateful that I was reminded that I have these abilities because having them and not using them, I don't know, it's a sin. And we were given these gifts for a reason, and it isn't to keep them to ourselves." Our fourth theme we named Learning to Tell a Different Kind of Story. And this is, related to the previous theme. The participants reported liking that the workshops had a very specific focus, namely to develop skills that could be applied to advocacy. This gave them a sense of direction for their efforts. The participants enjoyed the unique challenge of learning how to adapt their stories so that they would have optimal impact among policymakers. It provided them with a different lens through which to filter their own lived experiences, which led to new self-discoveries, as we will see in the next theme. Through the workshops, the participants were able to see the difference between a story they might tell their friends versus a story that they might tell in an advocacy setting. As one person said, "It's one thing to have a story that we could go on and on about, and every story is important, no matter how long it is. But to be able to tailor it down to the real essence and then connect that up to a piece of legislation that's going to highlight what that legislation is about, it's going to make people sit up and take notes. It's going to help push that legislation through." And this really speaks, as Kim was alluding to earlier, to the importance of storytelling in advocacy work. Stories grip our emotions. They build our capacity for empathy. Research has shown that human brains, as it turns out, are hardwired to respond to inspiring narratives. And exposure to stories has been linked to changes in both motivation and behavior. Research has also shown that information is much more memorable when it's presented in a story. So I think that this quote really speaks to the power of story for pushing through something like an important change in legislation. The next theme was one of my favorites, learning about, and probably I say that as a developmental psychologist, learning about oneself through learning to help others. Participants reported several ways in which they were positively impacted through their participation in the workshops. They acquired new knowledge, new skills, and they expected that. But they were somewhat surprised to learn that through the workshops, they would also be changed in broader and deeper ways. This theme highlights the many dimensions of growth that were made available through the workshops. Consider the following quote: "We all have gifts and we all have strengths. And these are all things that we can bring to the table, so to speak, and put into action quite effectively." I would say that the storytelling and advocacy for change workshops helped me to answer a question that I had. Where could I best use my gifts? And what are my gifts, actually? Where can I use my best use my gifts to reach other people, to touch other people, to advocate for others in important ways? Notably, this elder had the opportunity to share her story with various audiences that she described as providing a rare opportunity for feedback on her story and on her, on herself in turn. And that process was self-clarifying and transformative. Another person described a new appreciation for their own aging process and said that following the workshops, he booked an appointment with a geriatrician who specializes at the intersection of HIV and aging. He had never gone to a doctor in the past that had specialized in aging. It was really inspiring to see how these new self-understandings could lead to real behavioral change. The sixth theme we labeled the cost of the story, creating a space for vulnerability. And these next two themes are really what we might think of as process themes. So while participants reported that the experience of engaging in the workshops was overwhelmingly positive, this didn't mean that it was necessarily easy for them. And it's crucial for us to remember that in most cases, our participants were advocating for policy changes that were directly related to the challenges they have encountered in their own lives. One participant reflected on this experience in the following excerpt. There were a couple people in our group that weren't able to proceed with finishing off the public showcase part of the storytelling because I think it got either socially or emotionally too complicated for them. And I can't figure out what it would be, but I kind of wish there was some way to provide greater support for them, especially emotional. Because a lot of times people start, the primary story they want to tell, especially if they haven't been a storyteller, is usually about something that's quite difficult. And, as the participant is indicating, a few of our folks left the process early or opted to stay engaged, but not present their stories publicly. When we probed people's reasons for leaving or not sharing their stories, we found that their responses were multi-layered, but mostly came down to two factors. First, for some participants, they found the process of writing a story to be unexpectedly anxiety-provoking. Second, and more consequentially, I think, for some participants, storytelling meant revisiting unprocessed trauma from the past. And in some cases, the storytelling brought back to light painful memories that had been repressed or compartmentalized or not thought about for years, and in some cases, even decades. In one of our organizational meetings, we talked about needing two types of bandwidth to do this work, both with implications for access. First, the literal internet bandwidth required and the emotional bandwidth required, both for our participants and for the facilitators. Now, there were other reasons as well why people left, such as needing to manage medical appointments that were conflicting with our workshop offerings, and others just maybe simply didn't feel they had a story to share and it wasn't the right fit for their interests. Finally, our seventh theme was cultivating a community of support. So in addition to having skilled facilitators, given the challenges and potential vulnerabilities that I've just described, it's essential to cultivate a community of support in the workshops. And by community, we mean that, supporting the emotional well-being, by community of support, we mean that supporting the emotional well-being of the participants is not one person's job, but it's the job of the entire community of workshop participants to support each other. We set that expectation at the beginning. A participant spoke to this collective responsibility when he said, we're here to lift each other up, we're here to support each other, we're here to help each other get the word out and make things change. Such support can generate a safe space for the difficult work of storytelling, as this person describes. What was really nice is that people in the group were really open. I mean, I don't know exactly how many people knew each other in the group, but I think we were all pretty open about, we were open and kind of willing to risk ourselves and willing to get to know the other people in the group. And so it was really kind of a wonderful experience. I vividly remember the first time unprocessed trauma came up in the workshops. It was actually the very first workshop we did in the first cohort. I was really awestruck by the ways in which the workshop participants, the peers of this individual, unprompted, stepped in to support their peer. They didn't wait for the facilitators to intervene. They took matters into their own hands because they cared about this person. And that's when I remembered that LGBTQ plus people know how to take care of each other, and we always have. And that was this really interesting intergenerational lesson for me as well, and probably one of the most meaningful reflections that I have on the process myself. We're a community that cares for each other. That is it in terms of my introduction to themes. So I'm going to, at this point, I'm happy to answer more questions, pass it over to our next person, who I believe is Kim.
Thank you so much, Nick. We
My
are so
pleasure.
fortunate to have you on the Out Aging Committee. Every time I hear you speak on a webinar or just in our meetings, I think, man, I wish I had taken a class by Nick at some point in my life, but it's not over. I may show up in your classroom one day soon. So we have some recommendations that have come out of this report. And Ayana, if you want to go ahead and put them all up, I'll just, highlight a few of them, or maybe I'll just go through them all because this is good. So include, create, share, prioritize, and commit. Active words, right? So make sure that you are including LGBTQ older adults in the planning process. We are fortunate to have a standing body, our Out Aging Committee, that includes LGBTQ older adults. Make sure you create spaces for ongoing interactions between workshop participants. We actually have alumni activities now because we've had, I think, 2 or 3 cohorts of both for storytelling for change and advocating for change, and folks want to stay connected. Share new advocacy or storytelling opportunities with alumni and maximize visibility of LGBTQ older adults, which we do in a number of ways, including creating spaces for alumni themselves, as I mentioned, but also making sure that we are embedding stories and storytelling into just about everything that we do in a public-facing way. Prioritize in-person and hybrid events and convenings when possible. Super important to be flexible in this way. COVID had us literally on lockdown, and then nervous about getting together. And I will say that our virtual events, of course, allowed us to have greater reach with our programming. I remember someone reaching out from San Francisco to ask if he could promote our event and attend. And today we have someone from Belgium, I think. But people also appreciate getting together in person. And so when we had our two events related to the photo project, being able to hug each other, see each other in the flesh was just so rewarding. And you saw from the pictures, people were hugging each other and smiling and just connecting. And then commit to connecting alumni to future advocacy work and advanced workshops. So we are finding ways to do that. We're actually doing storytelling throughout the policy and advocacy department now. So we are able to have more events where storytellers are used, but we also want to honor the fact that folks said that they want to be engaged in advocacy work too. So we find ways to make that happen as well. Is that all the recommendations, Ayana? Just want to be sure before I go on to the next thing.
We have this next slide I just pulled up is the other half of the recommendation,
Gotcha.
but we also covered them throughout the presentation as well. So if there are any you want to highlight, Kim, but otherwise.
Sure. Yeah, I'll just do a couple of these. So one is to develop strategies to manage differing levels of experience and knowledge. And this is true both in the storytelling and in the advocacy for change. There are folks who have been doing storytelling for a little while or have done stories in other venues who might be a little more comfortable, but in the same cohort as folks who are doing that at the same time. And our facilitators, I think, find ways to manage that. And the same is true with the advocacy, as we do these Know Your Rights trainings, in addition to the Advocacy 101. Some folks have done that a little longer. Include a peer support person among the facilitator team to minimize anxiety. We didn't figure this out until year 2, but it's okay because we didn't have an alum in year 1. But we found that having someone who had gone through the experience really helped the newbies, if you will, sort of relax and move into it. And then there was the coaching aspect that was involved too. Phyllis was our peer support person, and Phyllis's demeanor, I think, was perfect for the job. And then the last one I'll highlight is ensure transparency around how and when participants' stories may be used in the future. So in our first cohort, because of the timing, we were able to move right into a storytelling showcase. So it was sort of a natural progression for folks to have that opportunity. And after that, because our trainings occurred at different times in the year, some of those opportunities, creating a showcase wasn't necessarily what we could do, but we found ways to add folks, storytellers in particular, to events that normally would not have had a storyteller. And I will say there was a richness that was added to each of these public events because the storytellers were there. So kudos to Nick and Ayanna and Jackie and other members of our Outaging Committee who touched this project, as well as all of the trainers and the cohort participants who allowed us to ask them deeper questions about their experiences and about how to not just make our program better, but we're sharing this with all of you in hopes that as you do work with LGBTQ older adults or any other population, that you have the lessons learned from us that you can take into your work. So get your questions ready, because we're going to shift gears here in just a sec. I realized that I forgot to talk about the significance of today. The reason we wanted to have this event on May 16th was because it's National Honor Our LGBT Elders Day. So we are celebrating and we are sharing, passing on the knowledge. I encourage folks to check the chat. It's hard to say check the chat because there are lots of Pride Action Tank resources that Jackie has been putting there, including access to our photo bank, which is available for anyone to use with photo credit to our wonderful photographer, Brissa Lamar. You're also going to have access to the final report that we've been talking about. There's a video of the storytelling showcase and other storytelling opportunities that are on our website. The Advocacy Day Action Center for AFC is in there, and as well as a post by Nick about our research methodology. So lots of good stuff there. So now we're going to shift gears and respond to your questions, if you have any. Oh, here's one from Marlo. Could you speak more about the connection between trauma and narrative, specifically how peer support in these spaces ameliorated the effects of re-traumatization upon recounting traumatizing experiences? How do we hold space for traumatic experiences of LGBT elders that are not able to be tied together with a narrative bow? Wow. Nick, I think that's for you.
All right. Okay, fine. I will, that's a really wonderful question. I will take a stab at it and then pass it over to others as well. And this might be something that Phyllis wants to contribute to as well, being our peer support person in that space. But what I want to, okay, so a couple different ways of things I want to say in response to this. So the first thing I'll say is that this has been a learning journey for us. Okay, so when this, I don't think we fully appreciated that this might happen in the way that it did. So we own that, and we responded to that immediately. We you know, as it came up in the first session, we're like, okay, how do we manage the situation? How do we ensure that this is an affirming experience for people? So in the future, we became very clear about the potential for re-traumatization at the beginning of the workshops. We were also very clear that people can choose their own adventure. They should only pursue an experience or a story if it felt right for them. So this wasn't the space to process an unprocessed trauma, because I am not a clinician or a therapist. I cannot offer professional support to the people in this space. Nobody in the space at this point can, although we have talked about including like a clinical social worker or a psychotherapist. That's something we've discussed. But we're very clear that this is the space to pursue some within those parameters for our participants to select a story that felt safe for them. When things came up, we would connect participants to professional services after the workshops. So we would always have a mechanism for following up. The one additional piece that I would add is that, and by the way, I think it would be wonderful to offer a space for people to do that processing. This just isn't it. So the one thing I want to say is that when we think about change making in policy contexts, there are certain types of stories that we want to tell. And those stories we know are connected to behavioral change in people hearing those stories. Those stories we can call different things. The literature, on this calls them restorative narratives. Sometimes they're called victim resilience narratives. So there is kind of a master narrative plot line that we're trying to encourage in the storytelling. And that is a story that demonstrates the struggle that needs to be responded to in policy change, but also provides hope or in some level of resolution. That, however, is also not true to everyone's experience. So we don't want to force people to tell a redemptive narrative, which is itself a cultural master narrative, that isn't true or authentic. So I felt I wanted to name that because part of, I think, that came up to me, Marlo, when you talked about tying a bow on it. We don't want people to tie bows on stories that are unprocessed because that's not real. Would anyone else like to respond to that question? Phyllis, I'm curious to know if you had a few reflections on what it's like to be a peer support person.
So here I am. I thought that it might be good to help people think about their stories longer. So if somebody was having a hard time focusing on a story, to have maybe an out of group dialogue with them so they can pinpoint a story that they wanted to tell. So that the story that encourages, that re-traumatizes them may be the story they need to tell, but not right now. So that was my thought. And I liked being a peer support person. It was really cool because I felt like I was learning how to tell stories again in a deeper way by watching people develop their stories when I wasn't under the same stress.
And I would add, Phyllis, that you were actually more than a peer support person. That's maybe the wrong name, because you were a facilitator. You really stepped into your light as a expert storyteller, despite your issues with that label. So it was fun to have you there, as a co-facilitator. You did have that piece of feedback. I'm remembering now. You had suggested, I think, after our last cycle, what if we sort of did an easier to tell story first? So everyone gets comfortable with the storytelling process. then maybe do the second story, which is a little bit harder to tell. You've just then eliminated all of those anxieties related to the writing process. So separating that, like if we have mastery over the storytelling, then maybe we can take greater risks with the content of the story and how personal it feels to us.
But that would require the wonderful storytelling for advocacy too. And I don't know about capacity.
That's it, right? Capacity. We need more money, folks.
Awesome. I don't see any other questions in the chat, but if you have any, please throw them in. But Nick or Ayana, Phyllis, any last words you want to offer the group?
I think storytelling is a really wonderful approach to letting people recognize that they're seen and they do have a story. Over the years, Kim has hounded me over the fact that I have a story, and upon reflection of participating in the storytelling workshop, I think it's, we've swallowed our visibility for so long, and as you can tell from my story, I swallowed it so long that I was unaware. And it's important to be aware. So it's really a good approach.
Thank you, Phyllis. It looks like there are a few more questions here in the chat. This one from Katie, who's on our Out-Aging Committee. Any recommendations for those that want to replicate storytelling for other purposes, especially with facilitators that are not professional storytellers?
That's a great question. There are tons of resources in the I'm gonna say like academic literature under the sort of area of life story work. I'll say quote unquote life story work. Because storytelling is a practice that's used in many elder care facilities and other spaces for therapeutic purposes. So you could tap into that for learning a little bit about how to run, for example, guided autobiography groups. But my initial response to that was actually more like, if you're not a storyteller, and I'm not a professional storyteller, but my initial response is go out and tell stories or get involved in a community. Like Kim is very involved with Outspoken, which is an LGBTQ plus storytelling community. There are also great resources online that you can watch storytelling and learn about storytelling. So there is a bit of like learning, I think, that a facilitator does need to do about storytelling before they can facilitate a group like this. But the good news is it's super fun learning to do.
I would add too that there are many forms of storytelling. One of our next projects will be a photo voice project, which is a methodology that actually allows the subjects, the participants, to take pictures of what's going on in their community, anchored by a particular question or set of questions, and they add a narrative to those pictures, basically an explanation of why they took the pictures that they took and built a story around that. So and that is a methodology that is also readily available to learn about on the internet as well. And there are many active examples, and we'll have an active example soon. Here's something from Meg. How did you foster resilience in folks sharing their stories to push for change? When we share in safe spaces, it can be hard, but how do you support and surround those who are sharing to legislators or elected officials who might not be as open-minded or kind-hearted? Well, I will say, what we're doing is a little different from the typical advocacy elevator pitch. We're creating longer form stories. What would you say, 7 to 8 minutes or so, Nick? And we are creating space to invite elected officials too, and other policymakers. So it's with the expectation that they're going to hear a longer story. These have also been done virtually, so it's not in front of the elected official. However, change happens as a result of these stories. One of our colleagues outside of our storytelling project did a storytelling project based on Medicaid. And the administrator for the Medicaid department was in the audience, virtual audience, and reached out to her to say, we've been hearing these things, hearing these stories though, basically is pushing us to action. And so there was follow-up to those sort of policy changes that were being asked for through the longer form storytelling. So stories are powerful, y'all. That's all I got to say. There is so much love in this chat for everyone. And one of the things that Ayana has put in the chat is our post-event survey. We really want folks to take that. As you can see, we use this research, your input, all of this to make our programs better. So it's a short survey, y'all, intentionally short, because we know we get tired of answering surveys. So please click on that link and go ahead and take that survey right away. This program has been recorded, so it will be available to folks. We usually post on our website fairly quickly. I think we'll also send a link in the follow-up email along with the link to the survey again. I just want to say this has been a dream come true to first have an out-aging committee where many of the members have been with us since 2016, but also in the last year or so to have added folks from downstate. So we have folks from Southern Illinois and Central Illinois who are now part of the out-aging committee, truly making it a statewide body. Stay tuned for all the things that we're going to continue to do. RRF Foundation for Aging has been the main funder for our outreach work, but we've also had funding through AARP over the years, as well as the Chicago Department of Public Health. Our grant for the Story Voice is coming through the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, so super excited about that. So excited that you all joined us today. We're going to continue our storytelling work. We're going to be reaching out to folks to get folks to join us. We want to do some intergenerational storytelling. So we've got lots of things planned with our Out-Aging Committee. But in the meantime, happy National Honor Our LGBT Elders Day. You get 5 minutes back. Thank you, Lamar, Phyllis, Ayana, Nick, Jackie, and Diego, who's listed as AFC Communications. Everybody have a great day. Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye.